Have you ever wondered what disappears first when an economy starts to die, even while the streets still look normal? What if the real collapse begins long before empty shelves, with one invisible promise suddenly failing in everyday life? If you like deep stories that make the world easier to understand, tap, like, subscribe, and share this with one person who always thinks everything will stay fine forever. Picture a quiet morning. A shop opens on time. Buses still move. People still go to work. The bank app still shows your balance. The numbers are there. Your salary still arrives. The lights still turn on. From a distance, nothing seems broken. But then you try to pay for food, withdraw cash, refill a prescription, or send money to a family member, and something small goes wrong. The card is declined. The ATM says unavailable. The price you saw yesterday is gone by noon. A transfer is delayed for no clear reason. The money is still supposed to be yours, but it no longer behaves like yours. That is the first clue. When people imagine economic collapse, they usually imagine the final stage. They imagine panic, riots, hunger, and headlines screaming about disaster. They imagine a giant crash that everyone can see at once. History tells a stranger story. Collapse usually does not begin as a single explosion. It begins as a fracture in trust. A link snaps between what money promises and what money can actually do in daily life. That first break is easy to miss because the system still looks alive. The shell remains, the signs stay lit. Officials say the situation is under control. The language is calm right until ordinary life stops working. That is why economic collapse confuses so many people. It does not first reveal itself in theory. It reveals itself in timing. Can your wage still carry you from payday to payday? Can your savings still turn into cash when you need them? Can the price on a shelf survive the walk to the checkout? Can the money in your account still buy the same medicine next week? These are not dramatic questions, but they are the questions that decide whether a society still functions. An economy is not just factories, markets, and charts. It is a giant web of promises. Your employer promises the money you earn today will still matter tomorrow. Your bank promises the number on your screen can become spendable cash. Your government promises the currency it issues will still be accepted next week. A store promises the price it offers still means something by the time you pay. Most people never think about these promises because in stable times, they work so smoothly that they become invisible. But when trust weakens, invisible systems become visible in the worst possible way. Think of modern life like a bridge made of routines. You cross it every day without fear. You do not inspect every bolt. You do not study the steel. You simply trust the bridge because it carried you yesterday. Then one morning, a few bolts are gone. The bridge still stands. Traffic still moves. Most people still cross. But the structure has changed. That is how collapse often starts. The first break is not the entire bridge falling into the river. The first break is the loss of confidence that the bridge will still hold the next step. This pattern shows up again and again across different countries and decades. The names change. The politics change. The currency changes. But the damage often begins in one of three places. In some countries, people can still see their money, but they cannot access it. In others, people can access money, but it loses value too fast to hold. In others, the same country ends up with two forms of money at once. The money that is real in everyday life, and the money that is trapped inside a broken system. Different costumes, same wound. The first thing that breaks is short-term trust. Trust that today's claim will still function tomorrow. Trust that a bank balance is close enough to cash. Trust that wages still connect labor to survival. Trust that saving is still a path into the future. Once that trust goes, people stop living month to month and start living hour to hour. That shift changes everything. Let's begin with Argentina in 2001, because few examples show this so clearly. For years, Argentina had tied its peso closely to the US dollar. That kind of system can create a feeling of order. It can calm fears. It can make people believe the local currency is stronger than it truly is. But systems like that depend on confidence. If confidence fades, everyone moves toward the exit at the same time. The promise sounds stable until too many people test it at once. In late 2001, that pressure became impossible to hide. People feared the banks would not be able to meet demands. Money began leaving the system. The government responded by limiting bank withdrawals. Suddenly, people who technically had money could not freely reach it. Imagine the shock. You worked, saved, planned, sacrificed, and trusted the system. Then one morning, the system tells you your money still exists, but you can only touch a small piece of it. That changes something deep in the mind. A bank account stops feeling like security. It starts feeling like a cage with your name on it. And when enough people feel that, ordinary commerce begins to shake. Families delay purchases. Business owners cannot plan. Employees worry about payroll. Sellers demand different forms of payment. Every small transaction becomes uncertain. The fear spreads because no one knows how far the restrictions will go or how long they will last. What made the Argentine crisis so painful was not only the policy itself, it was the human humiliation inside it. Savings are not just numbers. They are postponed life. They are years of discipline. They are future school fees, future rent, future repairs, future freedom. When access is blocked, what really freezes is not only money. Plans freeze, confidence freezes, time freezes. Now think about what happens to behavior when people no longer believe that money in the bank is the same as money in the hand. They rush to withdraw. They rush to spend. They rush to convert. The public begins trying to escape the system that had once felt safe. That is the hidden pattern. The crisis is no longer just financial. It becomes behavioral. And once behavior changes, even small restrictions can produce much larger consequences. This is why the first stage of collapse is so deceptive. Officials may call it temporary, experts may frame it as a necessary measure, news reports may focus on technical terms. But ordinary people experience something much simpler. Yesterday, money moved. Today, it sticks. Yesterday, the system felt open. Today, it feels controlled. Yesterday, the future felt reachable. Today, it feels locked behind a desk, a rule, a limit, or a delay. And yet Argentina is only one version of the pattern. There, the break appeared at the point of access. People could not freely turn deposits into usable cash. But now travel back to Germany in 1923, and you see the same pattern wearing a different face. In Weimar Germany, the problem was not that people could not get money. They could get money. The government printed enormous amounts of it. The deeper problem was that money stopped carrying value through time. A wage earned in the morning could lose meaning by the evening. A price posted at breakfast might be useless by dinner. In that world, even holding cash for a short time became dangerous. This is the form of collapse people often remember in images. Huge bundles of notes, prices racing upward, ordinary people using mountains of paper just to buy basic goods. But the emotional truth of hyperinflation is not really about absurdly large numbers. It is about speed. It is about time turning hostile. It is about realizing that waiting has become a form of loss. Imagine being paid on Friday and knowing that if you do not spend immediately, your family will be weaker by Saturday. Imagine a pensioner who saved for years, only to watch those savings dissolve in front of them. Imagine a teacher, a clerk, or a shopkeeper trying to act rationally in a world where the measuring stick itself is melting. That is what hyperinflation does. It destroys money's ability to carry stability across time. That matters more than many people realize. Money is not just paper or digits. It is a bridge between effort and future reward. When hyperinflation destroys that bridge, society changes its rhythm. People stop thinking in months. They start thinking in hours. Workers rush to spend wages the moment they are paid. Businesses shorten contracts. Lenders retreat. Savers panic. The future becomes too unreliable to plan around. The deepest cruelty is who gets hit hardest. People on fixed incomes suffer first. Pensioners, workers with slow wage adjustments, careful savers. The people who followed the rules of stable society become the people most exposed when the meaning of money collapses. They did not make reckless bets. They did not act wildly. They simply trusted the wrong time horizon. This is one of the coldest truths in financial history. Collapse punishes slowness. It punishes people whose wealth is trapped in promises that cannot move fast enough. In hyperinflation, someone with debt and real assets may suffer less than someone with cash savings and perfect habits. That feels morally upside down, but collapse often is upside down. It does not reward virtue. It rewards position, timing, and flexibility. So now compare Argentina and Weimar. In one case, money could not be accessed. In the other, money could be accessed but not trusted to hold value. Different pain. Same underlying break. In both cases, people lost faith that a claim today would still function tomorrow. That is the hidden pattern we are chasing. If this pattern is already changing how you see money, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video with a friend who thinks collapse only starts when the shelves are empty. Now, let's move to Lebanon after 2019 because this example may be the most haunting for modern viewers. Lebanon did not collapse in one dramatic flash. It weakened like a building with hidden structural rot. On the surface, many people believed their savings were safe, especially if those savings were held in dollars inside the banking system. That belief turned out to be far more fragile than it seemed. For years, Lebanon's financial structure depended on confidence, capital inflows, and a system that looked stable as long as enough money kept coming in. But once that inflow weakened and pressure built, the difference between dollars on paper and dollars in real life became brutally clear. Depositors discovered that a bank account labeled in dollars was not always the same as having dollars they could actually use. This is where collapse becomes almost surreal. The account still exists. The balance is still visible. The number still looks familiar, but the usefulness is gone. Transfers are blocked. Withdrawals are rationed. Conversions happen at punishing rates. Savings remain on the screen like a photograph of wealth rather than wealth itself. The shape is there. The power is not. A society in that condition starts inventing new language because old language stops being accurate. People begin distinguishing between one kind of money and another inside the same country. Fresh money, trapped money, Real money, system money, official money, street money. Once a nation starts splitting one currency into versions of reality, trust has already cracked wide open. And when trust cracks, the damage never stays inside finance. It spreads outward. Doctors leave. Students rethink the future. Couples postpone marriage. Parents struggle to buy medicine. Businesses fail. Not because demand disappears overnight, but because the rails of payment stop working smoothly. That is why collapse feels bigger than economics. It enters kitchens, hospitals, classrooms, and funerals. What happened in Lebanon shows something important. Collapse does not always begin with a headline everyone immediately understands. Sometimes it begins when people slowly realize their money has become conditional. It exists only under certain rules, certain windows, certain exchange rates, certain permissions. The problem is not just loss, it is uncertainty. Not knowing how much of your own life is still reachable. That uncertainty changes behavior fast. People search for outside currency. They distrust local institutions. They hoard goods. They move savings if they can. They lean on family abroad. The formal economy weakens, while informal survival networks grow stronger. Society begins dividing between those with access to harder money and those trapped inside the failing system. This pattern also appeared in Greece during the debt crisis, especially in 2015 when banks closed and cash withdrawals were limited. Think about how psychologically violent that is. In a normal society, going to the bank is boring. It is routine. It is almost invisible. During crisis, it becomes emotional. A simple withdrawal turns into a question of dignity. A pensioner standing in line is no longer just a customer. They are a person asking the system for proof that their lifetime of work still counts. That is what makes economic collapse so dangerous. It reduces big structures into intimate humiliations. Not theory, not ideology, small scenes. Someone standing at an ATM that no longer gives what it used to give. Someone watching a shopkeeper change a price twice in one afternoon. Someone holding a paycheck that already feels late the moment it arrives. Someone realizing that the money they trusted has become permission-based. Cyprus gave the world another warning in 2013. There, some depositors learned that money in a bank is not always safe in the simple way most people imagine. When large uninsured deposits faced major losses, the lesson was brutal. A savings balance can look liquid, respectable, and legally protected, right up until a crisis forces a different reality. Again, the key issue was not only the amount lost, it was the breaking of expectation. People discovered that claims they thought were stable could suddenly be redefined. And then there is Zimbabwe, where hyperinflation became so extreme that the local currency lost everyday meaning. Once that happens, society starts escaping into alternative money. Another currency begins doing the work the local one can no longer do. Wages, prices, and transactions shift elsewhere. On paper, the old currency may remain. In practice, people move on without it. That is another version of the first break. The official system remains visible, but daily trust has migrated somewhere else. Notice what all these cases share. Argentina, Weimar Germany, Lebanon, Greece, Cyprus, Zimbabwe. Different histories, different leaders, different international conditions, different institutions. Yet the first meaningful fracture keeps circling the same truth. The problem starts when people stop believing that money will behave as expected over the near future. Not over 10 years, over days, over hours, over the next transaction. That is why economic collapse is best understood as a crisis of continuity. People can survive hardship. Societies can survive low growth. Families can survive bad years. What they cannot easily survive is the breakdown of the line connecting effort to outcome. If work no longer reliably becomes spending power, if savings no longer reliably become security, if prices no longer reliably communicate value, then the map of normal life begins to tear. A lot of people think collapse means there is no money. Very often that is not true at first. There may still be plenty of money in the system. The deeper problem is that the money stops being trusted in the same way. Access weakens, value weakens, convertibility weakens, reliability weakens. It is less like a bomb and more like rust. The damage spreads through the joints. Here's another way to see it. In healthy times, money performs 3 quiet jobs. It stores value, it measures value, it moves value. During collapse, one of those jobs usually starts failing before the others. In Argentina, movement broke first. In Weimar, storage broke first. In Lebanon, convertibility and sameness broke first. In Zimbabwe, trust migrated to a different monetary rail altogether. But underneath each version was the same hidden event. The social agreement around money stopped holding together, and when that agreement weakens, people start adapting in ways that can make the crisis worse. They spend faster. They withdraw faster. They convert faster. They hoard harder assets. They distrust official language. They shorten contracts. They raise prices sooner. They demand payment in stronger forms. Every protective move by individuals adds pressure to the system. Fear becomes self-feeding. This is one reason authorities often struggle to stop collapse once it reaches public behavior. Policies can slow symptoms, they can buy time, they can change the shape of the damage, but once millions of people stop trusting tomorrow, no speech can easily restore the lost rhythm of ordinary life. Trust is slow to build and fast to fracture. And when broken, it is rarely repaired by reassurance alone. Many viewers may be asking a hard question right now. Why do ordinary people not see this earlier? Because the early stage feels too small to deserve the word collapse. A delayed transfer does not sound historic. A daily cash limit does not sound like the end of a system. A weird gap between official prices and street prices does not look like a major turning point. But those are exactly the kinds of clues history leaves behind. If you start noticing those clues, you begin to understand that collapse is often a process of shrinking horizons. First, people stop trusting next year, then next month, then next week, then tomorrow. Finally, they trust only what is immediate. Cash in hand, food on the shelf, fuel in the tank, medicine at home, favors from people they know. Society retreats from abstraction into immediacy. That retreat matters because modern economies depend on delayed trust. You go to work today because you believe the pay will matter later. You save because you believe future access is real. You sign contracts because you believe the unit of value will remain meaningful. Without those assumptions, the system does not disappear in 1 second, but it becomes harder to plan, harder to invest, harder to cooperate, and harder to stay calm. Pause for a second and ask yourself this. If your salary still arrived tomorrow, but you no longer trusted what that salary could do 3 days later, how would you live? If that question makes you uncomfortable, subscribe now and send this video to someone who needs to think deeper about how fragile normal really is. Now we need to go one layer deeper, because saying trust breaks first is true, but incomplete. We should ask what kind of trust. Not all trust is equal. There is trust in institutions, trust in rules, trust in governments, trust in prices, trust in banks, trust in employers, trust in currency, trust in tomorrow. But the most important one during collapse is practical trust. Can I use this when I need it? That question is more powerful than ideology. A citizen may still believe in their country and still lose faith in their bank. They may still believe their bank is legal and still lose faith in their currency. They may still believe the currency is official and still lose faith in prices. Collapse rarely begins as a total emotional shift. It begins with one practical doubt spreading into another. First, a doubt about access, then a doubt about value, then a doubt about fairness, then a doubt about the future itself. The chain reaction is devastating because money is woven into everything. Food is not just food. It is money translated into calories. Medicine is money translated into health. Rent is money translated into shelter. School is money translated into possibility. Transport is money translated into movement. When money stops functioning smoothly, all of those translations become unstable. That is why people in collapsing economies often feel exhausted even before they feel poor. Every simple task becomes complicated. You can see this clearly in the lives of pensioners. In stable times, a pension is not wealth. It is regularity. It is a promise that old age will remain livable. But in a collapse, fixed income becomes one of the most fragile positions imaginable. If banks restrict access, pensioners suffer. If prices outrun adjustments, pensioners suffer. If the currency splits into stronger and weaker forms, pensioners suffer. They are often trapped inside promises that move too slowly. The same is true for the middle class more broadly. Stable societies teach people a certain moral logic. Work steadily, save carefully, keep your money in formal institutions, follow the rules, plan long term. Under normal conditions, those habits help people build secure lives. During collapse, those same habits can become vulnerabilities if savings are trapped, wages lag, and institutions fail to honor expectations. The safest looking floor suddenly gives way. This is one reason collapse feels so emotionally shocking. It is not only destructive, it is selective. It does not hit everyone equally. People with outside income, stronger currency access, tradable goods, hard assets, family abroad, mobile businesses, or flexible pricing power often find ways to soften the blow. People tied to local salaries, local pensions, slow contracts, and trapped savings often bear the worst pain. Collapse redraws the map of who is secure and who is exposed. That selectivity can damage society almost as much as the financial loss itself. Why? Because it breaks the moral story people tell about fairness. In healthy times, many believe careful behavior leads to stability. In collapse, someone with no savings but useful inventory may cope better than someone with a lifetime of cash savings. Someone with debts may watch those debts shrink in real terms while savers are wiped out. Someone paid in outside currency may live in a completely different reality from a neighbor paid in local money. The result is not only economic stress, it is deep social bitterness. That unfairness poisons politics. When careful savers are punished while more flexible people cope better, Anger rises fast. The money crisis becomes a crisis of legitimacy because the public no longer believes the rules are real or fair. Authorities often try to save appearances while function keeps dying. Balances stay on screens, salaries still arrive, and official prices still exist, but daily life fills with friction. People stop judging stability by speeches and start judging it by one test. Can I use this money when I need it? Once enough, small frictions pile up, private self-protection turns into public panic, and millions of rational choices push the crisis forward. Now think about the phrase economic collapse itself. It sounds huge, almost theatrical, but the hidden pattern is often small enough to fit in your pocket. A debit card that stops working, a transfer that never clears, a stack of notes worth less by sunset, a salary converted at the wrong rate, a line outside an ATM, a store refusing local currency for certain goods. These moments are tiny on their own. Together they announce that the system's invisible promises are failing. If this video is helping you see the real anatomy of collapse, share it with one smart friend, leave a comment with the sign you think would appear first, and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive. At this point, we should ask another question. If the first thing that breaks is trust in short-term promises, what do the people who survive better usually understand? Not perfectly, not magically, but history suggests they grasp one idea earlier than others. They realize that money is not just a thing. It is a relationship between time, trust, and access. Once that relationship starts cracking, old assumptions become dangerous. People who navigate these periods better often do three things. First, they stop confusing legal ownership with practical control. This sounds obvious, but in normal times the two feel almost identical. If the account is yours, you assume the money is yours in a usable sense. If the wage is paid, you assume it carries stable value. If the note is official, you assume it is widely trusted. Collapse teaches a painful lesson. Ownership on paper and usefulness in reality can separate. Second, they pay attention to the speed of change, not just the size of change. Many people can handle bad news if it moves slowly, but once prices, rules, or access conditions shift quickly, the game changes. In high inflation, the speed itself becomes destructive. In banking crises, the speed of new restrictions matters. In currency crises, the speed of trust loss matters. Fast change compresses decision-making and punishes anyone who relies on calm routines. Third, they notice behavior sooner than slogans. They watch what depositors are doing, what importers are demanding, what shopkeepers are accepting, what families are hoarding, what workers are asking for, what exchange rates are whispering. Official language often lags lived reality. Behavior speaks first. The market mutters before the public screams. This does not mean everyone can avoid damage. Most cannot. Collapse is not a puzzle that a few clever people fully solve. It is a storm that lands unevenly. But some suffer less because they adapt to the real pattern instead of the official story. They understand that when trust in tomorrow weakens, the most important question becomes immediate function. What still works? What still converts? What still holds? What still moves? This is also why strong communities matter so much in collapsing conditions. When formal systems lose reliability, people begin leaning harder on social trust. Family abroad, friends with information, neighbors willing to trade, employers willing to pay in useful goods. Informal networks often become survival infrastructure. That is not romantic. It is simply what happens when official pathways become unreliable. And notice how different that is from the world stable systems encourage. Stable systems train people to trust institutions over relationships. You trust banks, payment rails, contracts, pensions, supermarkets, and central utilities. In crisis, those formal systems may still exist, but they become harder to rely on. Then, people fall back on something older and more personal. Known people, immediate goods, direct exchange, harder forms of value, local trust. That retreat from abstraction to immediacy is one of the clearest signs that a system is weakening. It means people no longer believe the formal map will guide them safely. They start navigating by what is concrete, cash if possible, goods if necessary, hard currency if available. Social trust whenever official trust fades. This brings us to the emotional center of the whole story. The real horror of collapse is not just deprivation, it is disorientation. People stop knowing what to trust, what things are worth, which rules still matter, or how far their effort will carry them. Imagine trying to build a life, while the measuring stick keeps changing length in your hands. That is what collapse feels like at ground level. And that is why the first break matters so much. If you misunderstand the first break, you misunderstand the whole process. If you think collapse starts only when shelves are empty, you will miss the earlier signals. If you think it starts only when governments fall, you will miss the earlier pain. If you think it starts only when money disappears, you will miss the more subtle truth. Collapse begins when money stops keeping its everyday promises. It may start as a banking issue, a currency issue, a debt issue, an inflation issue, or a political issue. Those are different doors into the same dark room. Inside that room, the lived experience is similar. The future shortens, access weakens, value flickers, trust fragments, people become more defensive, institutions become more strained. The shell of normal life can remain standing for a while, but the inner current is already unstable. That is why the most haunting images from collapsing economies are often so ordinary. Not burning buildings, not dramatic speeches. A pensioner waiting outside a bank, a mother rushing to buy groceries before prices jump again, a shopkeeper refusing payment in the local note, a worker spending wages the same hour they are received, a saver staring at a balance that can no longer be used freely. These are the human fingerprints of systems failing from the inside. Now step back and say the answer plainly. What really breaks first during an economic collapse is not always production, not always public order, not always the currency in a narrow technical sense. What breaks first is confidence that a claim today will still function tomorrow. Sometimes that appears as frozen access, sometimes as fast rising prices, sometimes as split forms of money, sometimes as a silent migration into stronger alternatives. But the root fracture is the same. Once people no longer trust short-term promises, the rest can unravel with frightening speed. Spending changes, saving changes, pricing changes. Borrowing changes, politics changes, even relationships change. A society begins to operate more like an emergency zone and less like a long-term project. People stop building and start shielding. They stop assuming and start checking. They stop trusting the system and start testing it. That may be the deepest lesson history offers. Economies do not live by numbers alone. They live by belief disciplined through routine. When that belief weakens, routines fail. When routines fail, the cost shows up first in daily life, then in institutions, then in the wider social order. The collapse becomes visible to everyone only after it has already become intimate for ordinary people. So, if you want to understand the hidden pattern, do not look first for the loudest image. Look for the first broken promise in daily life. Look for the gap between visible money and usable money. Look for the point where waiting becomes dangerous. Look for the moment people stop trusting time. That is where collapse quietly begins. Before we close, take 1 second to like this video, subscribe for more clear history-driven breakdowns, and send it to someone who still thinks trust in money is automatic instead of earned every single day. That is the unsettling part. Modern life feels solid only because millions of people keep believing tomorrow will honor today's claim. When that belief weakens, the machine may keep running, but the sound changes. Delays appear, limits appear, workarounds appear. By the time everyone agrees a collapse is happening, many families have already been living inside it. So the hidden pattern is simple. Collapse often begins when money stops carrying trust across short stretches of time. Once people no longer believe today's money will behave like tomorrow's money, the ground shifts under everything else. That is the first crack, and that is when a society starts drifting from confidence into survival. If there is one image to keep in your mind, let it be this. Not a burning skyline, not a graph crashing on television. A person reaching for something they already earned, already saved, already believed was secure, and finding that the system has placed a wall between ownership and use. That wall can take many forms. A withdrawal cap, a worthless note, a broken exchange rate, a trapped deposit, a dual currency reality. But once that wall appears, the meaning of money has already begun to fail. And when the meaning of money fails, the effects move far beyond finance. Dreams shrink, patience shrinks, trust shrinks, a family postpones a child's education, a grandparent cuts medicine, a young worker leaves the country, a shop closes, a marriage is delayed, a life plan is cut down to the size of next week. Collapse is not only about loss of wealth, it is about loss of horizon. That is what really breaks first, the horizon. The smooth line between effort and security, the quiet confidence that what you have built can carry you forward. Once that line snaps, people no longer live inside a stable future. They live inside a series of urgent presents. And history shows that when a society is forced to live that way for too long, the damage reaches much deeper than money. That is what really breaks first. The horizon, the smooth line between effort and security, the quiet confidence that what you have built can carry you forward. Once that line snaps, people no longer live inside a stable future. They live inside a series of urgent presents. And history shows that when a society is forced to live that way for too long, the damage reaches much deeper than money. So the next time someone says collapse means chaos all at once, remember the hidden pattern. First, the promises wobble. Then daily life starts slipping. Then trust leaves the room. Only after that does the wider disaster become obvious. By then, the earliest victims are rarely the reckless. They are often the ordinary people who did exactly what stable societies told them to do. They worked, they saved, they waited, they trusted. And then one day, trust stopped paying. That is the warning. That is the pattern. And that is why the first break is the one that matters most.